Welcome to Industrial Voices, the podcast where leaders in manufacturing, e-commerce, and logistics share stories and insights on the trends shaping their industries. I'm Bradley Dunn, a commercial real estate broker specializing in industrial real estate across the Southeast. Let's get after it. So, JP, welcome to Industrial Voices. I guess before we jump in, I'll give you the guest kind of a quick background on you, quick overview of what it is you've done, which is thoroughly impressive. But our guest today is JP Conklin, founder of Pensford Financial Consulting and founder of LoanBoss. JP is a graduate of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, go Heels, with a degree in economics. He is a U.S. Army veteran who served in the elite, and I'm correct if I'm saying this wrong, 1st Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment.
Yep.
Okay. He began his career on the trading floor at Wachovia, where he specialized in interest rate derivatives for commercial real estate groups before launching Pensford in 2009 to level the playing field between banks and borrowers. In 2019, he founded LoanBoss, a software platform built to help real estate owners and CFOs manage complex loan portfolios. And beyond his business, JP is widely followed for his weekly newsletter, which I love, and his Rate Guide podcast, which I love, where he breaks down the economy and interest rate policy in plain English that even I can understand. He's also a private pilot, the father of 5, and lives with his family in Charlotte, North Carolina. So JP, welcome. Appreciate you coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess that's your kind of like professional snapshot, but tell us a little bit about where you're from, what your background is. Obviously you've done a ton of very cool things, including the military. But yeah, just give us kind of the snapshot of you.
Yeah, the bio makes it sound impressive. And then when you piece it all together and understand why I did each of those, you realize, oh, it's not impressive at all. It was just by accident. I grew up in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, which is about an hour west of Philadelphia. So grew up a diehard Eagles fan, a diehard Penn State fan. Went to Penn State out of high school, was a total screw up, dropped out, joined the Army. And Army helped straighten me out. That led me to Chapel Hill. Go Heels, although it's a rough year so far. And from there, I went to the Wachovia trading floor. And so it's been quite the journey, but I've been in Charlotte now for 20 years, and I consider this home.
Okay, and so you went from Chapel Hill to Wachovia.
Yes.
And so how long were you in the military prior to going back to school?
3 years.
3 years. Okay, and what's kind of a typical tour? Or did you go overseas or?
I was not deployed for any extended period of time. Typical is usually around 3 years. You'll usually see 2 to 4 years. So I was right down the middle. Pretty much describes my military service as pretty average overall.
Well, I guess transitioning to your military service, and I'm really curious about that. And that was one thing that I did not know about you prior to kind of digging in and getting prepped for this. So what did serving in the one of the Army's most elite units teach you about leadership and grit and just kind of career in general?
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things looking back on it was without a doubt the best experience of my life. But at the time, it was largely because I was such a screw up at college. And so people did not join the military back then unless they weren't going to college. And so it was.
And what year would this have been?
97.
Okay.
And so people basically looked down on it and, oh, well, you failed at college. And that was true. Once I was done, I was very proud of that service. And so I think post 9/11, the attitude towards the military changed dramatically. There was not the sort of patriotism back then that there is today around people serving. So I'm glad that I did it end up being the best thing for me, and I got way more out of it than they got out of me. You know, I'm the most undecorated soldier of all time. But speaking specifically about like my time at Ranger Battalion it really just taught me the value of persistence. More so than anything, just don't quit. No matter what, do not ever quit. And I think that has served me very well in the business community. As far as the leadership goes, I would say first and foremost is lead from the front and never ask your troops to do anything that you wouldn't do for them first. And then the military is also very big on extreme ownership, right? Like we have to take ownership. Everything that happens at my 2 companies is a reflection of me. There is not a time when I can blame somebody else because it's really just because then I failed to do something, whether I failed to set them up for success or I failed to get the right resources in their hands. And I just have to have that candid assessment of myself and say it all begins and ends with me. And that just came straight from the military.
Well, I feel like you've been pretty self-deprecating, but appreciate your service, and anyone who can make the Rangers is impressive in my book. So now translating it directly to business. So like how does it how does that translate to helping clients and doing the things that you do for your clients, right? Like you've talked about leading your businesses, but like how about kind of being a service oriented side? Like when I think of military, like I don't necessarily think of like service oriented.
What I think really maybe separates us from anybody else in this space is the discipline that we approach customer service with. That everybody knows the minute they show up at our companies, the very first thing they're taught is you have 2 hours to respond to every client, no matter what. Because if a client takes the time to contact us, we have to respond to them. Even if it's something that we can't get to and just say, hey, listen, we've received this, markets are closed, we'll be back to you first thing in the morning. Just let them know we received it and we're going to take care of them. And when we apply that structure and that discipline to every interaction that we have with them, what they find is a much more proactive approach to helping them, rather than them feeling as if they have to babysit us and stay on top of us to make sure that the transaction happens smoothly. Right? Like we understand very well, we are the tail on the dog. And so there's way more important things going on. We should make our part of it as painless as possible.
Got it. Slightly off script, but the Rangers have a ton of sayings, right? Rangers lead the way, high speed, low drag. Like what's your favorite Ranger saying that you find yourself saying over and over again?
Rangers lead the way is without a doubt the number one saying in Ranger Battalion. So I think I have to go with that one.
Well, and I just purchased a very niche book about D-Day. I think it was Dutch Coda, who was the one that gave the Rangers that slogan on Omaha Beach. And I thought that was pretty cool. So, okay, cool. Now let's talk about the economy, which this is why largely if you're listening to this right now, you're probably listening to it. But let's zoom out and talk to us about just kind of the current state of the economy as if this room was filled with executives.
I'd say it's kind of a boring take, but I think the economy is okay right now. I don't think that it's nearly as terrible as some people would describe it, and I don't think it's nearly as strong as some people would describe it. I think we have far less cushion than we had a couple years ago. And so it is definitely teetering. And I think depending on how long the shutdown lasts, how long tariffs drag on, those are the sort of things that lead to uncertainty and job losses that I think could topple us. I think there's a very good chance we avoid any sort of significant downturn. But as of right now, I would say it's just kind of fine. And the regulatory regime seems like it's set up for success going forward. But there are so many other headwinds, that self-inflicted headwinds, that we just should be cautious right now.
Yeah. So you're a pro. A lot of us are novice. We're starting to see jobs reports and news articles, and it's making its way all the way into pretty much everyone's dashboard. When you, as a pro, are looking at the jobs reports, what are you looking at first, and what data actually matters to you?
So I'm such a hypocrite because I always criticize everybody in the market for overreacting to the headline non-farm payrolls numbers, and yet that is the first thing that I look at. The second thing I look at would be the unemployment rate. And then the third thing I look at is the revisions to both of those. The revisions right now matter far more than anything else. And they have really mattered for about the last year to 18 months when we started realizing that there were significant revisions every single month. So if you aren't a nerd for economic data like I am, you might not know that they release the number. The next month they release a revision to that number. And then the month after that, they release another revision, which is the final revision. And then about 18 months later, they will revise an annual period of time. And what we have seen consistently for the last 2 or 3 years is huge downward revisions over and over again. And the market just continued to overreact to the initial headline. You would see these headlines that would talk about resiliency and a strong labor market. Fast forward 2 months later, you'd get another strong report. Fine print would say, oh, by the way, that number from 2 months ago was actually way weaker than we thought. But everybody's moved on, and then they're distracted by the new report. And so this has just been a trend that's been going for 2 or 3 years. And I think the labor market is finally starting to show its true colors.
And so you're a pro at this, and when I see these revisions, like they seem gigantic and like order of magnitude shifting. Is this typical to see these types of large revisions? Is this atypical? And when you go back in history throughout your career, like what are typical revisions looking like, and how do they contrast?
Yeah, nothing like this. This is very atypical, and the fact that they're always the same direction is also very atypical. Normally you see noise up and down. The average number might be about plus or minus 15,000. Right now we're seeing the average number ends up being closer to 50,000. And then we saw last year's annual number get revised down by an additional 1 million, which is the largest on record. So this is completely atypical. I do not subscribe to the theory that there's something nefarious going on behind the scenes. I just think that particularly after COVID, it became harder and harder for the statisticians to gather this data.
Yeah.
And from what I can tell, the BLS and the BEA have not necessarily changed their survey methodologies to keep up with technology changes. I can't think of a single person, if they were in this room, a room full of executives, who would answer a phone call from an anonymous number, particularly if it said federal government. And yet that's how they survey. So think about the people who are picking up the phone and answering that, and then they are being used as the representative sample for these surveys.
So this is similar to political polling.
Very similar, yes.
Okay. So that was going to be my next question, which is how do they gather this data? And then what information comes in after the initial gathering that causes revisions?
Yeah, so I'll answer the second part first, which is they just keep getting more responses to that, which then allows them to narrow down the variance as they report this. The initial survey is simply just phone calls. They just call. And so there's two different surveys. The one that leads to the non-farm payroll report is done by the BLS, and they call individuals. And they simply ask them, are you employed? That's it. All they're looking for is, do you have a job or not? The BEA calls businesses and asks them, how many people do you have on your payroll? And if they have 3 people who have 10 jobs, those people count for each one of those different jobs if each company gets called. So it leads to double counting, triple counting, quadruple counting. And so these two reports have basic similar methodologies, but one calls the house, one calls the business. And right now, I would argue that the one that calls the business, the unemployment rate, is the more accurate number of the two.
Okay. How would you do this if you were put in charge? That sounds archaic.
No
offense to anyone listening.
Yeah, there has to be a better technology for this. I have been contacted on the business side to participate in these, and they are not very friendly about it, and they say that it's mandatory, and it is a huge pain to send in this paperwork, and you're signed up for 3 years at a time. And I guess that's to maintain the statistical noise around it. Why not just make it a web portal, right? If you could let me fill out 5 questions on my phone and say, listen, you're signed up for this for the next 3 years, I can manage that. But if you call me, I'm not answering the phone call. And if you send me a letter, I'm probably not responding to it. So at a minimum, just figure out a way to do this using a website for crying out loud.
Yeah. Well, and to me, like when you re-up your entity at the beginning of every year, they ask you like your address and your phone number. I feel like that would be a wonderful time to collect how many employees you have.
Perfect. That's a great example of a way to do it differently. Yeah. This is not rocket science.
Right. I mean, that would be a yearly snapshot, but still, that'd be incredibly accurate, assuming people don't perjure themselves. Okay. Now let's switch from labor statistics to wage growth. So how much is wage growth shaping the Fed's moves? And am I to assume that they're gathering the data in the same way?
Wage growth is a little bit faster, a little bit more accurate. The Fed believes that the correlation between wage growth and inflation is overstated. They believe that there is some correlation, but it's not as strong as a lot of people believe. I think wage growth is one of those things that just makes sense when you think about tying it to inflation. But in reality, the studies don't necessarily back that. It's usually the other way around. Inflation leads wage growth. And if you think about coming out of COVID, $3 trillion gets dropped on the economy. We have inflation, and all of a sudden employers are chasing to keep up with, wages. And so I think the opposite is happening now. We're actually seeing it lead the other direction. So I don't put a ton of weight on the fact that wage growth might continue to drive inflation. I think it's the other way around. Inflation actually leads that. They don't factor that in nearly as much as they do simple things such as how's the state of the labor market. They're far more worried about, are people losing jobs? How is the bottom 50% of income earners doing? They focus on those things more so than just the wage growth.
Makes sense. And do you think that they have a dual mandate, right? And we're maybe jumping ahead here, which is the labor market and then inflation. Do you think they prioritize one over the other?
Depends on the environment. 2 years ago, they definitely prioritized inflation. And I've been arguing for the last year or so that they are definitely prioritizing jobs. That inflation, even though it hasn't gotten back down to their 2% target, it's within a comfortable range. If it's been between 2 and 3%, nobody's losing sleep at those levels. 5%, different game. Then it becomes the focal point. But I just think that the fact that it's 3% instead of 2% is not that big of a deal. And a lot of our customers did not really realize where the origin of 2% inflation came from. And it's from 1988, a New Zealand Minister of Finance kind of made it up on the fly. He was being interviewed on April Fool's Day of all days. And they asked him, hey, what do you think inflation should be? And New Zealand had been battling with double-digit inflation for 15 years. Can you imagine dealing with double-digit inflation for 15 years? And he was really trying to shift the expectations for inflations. He wanted people to lower their expectations because that really leads where ultimate inflation goes. And so on the fly, he just said 0%. He totally made it up. And
2% or 0%?
He said 0%.
Okay.
So they conduct the interview. He eventually ends up increasing that to 1%. He leaves the room, and it's starting to catch on like wildfire. He had no idea that this was going to happen. This was just some innocuous TV interview. And so because New Zealand's a small country, and he's the Minister of Finance, he goes and gets some PhDs to write a research paper to support his position, and then takes it to their version of Congress and gets it passed all within a year. They don't pass 0 or 1%, but they pass 2% as the target. And within about 7 years, a whole bunch of countries, notably England, adopted 2% as the inflation target, even though he recently said a couple of years ago that he just made it up on the fly. But we've all been chasing this magical number. And what I think the Fed regrets is committing to that number. We didn't commit to it until 2014. Greenspan did not want an inflation target. Bernanke fought it initially, eventually said, okay, this is what we're going for. But it was because we were beneath it. And he was trying to say we were going to get inflation back up to 2%. If you look at the other part of the mandate, it's the labor market. They don't have a specific unemployment rate that they're targeting. They just say full employment. And I think they wish that they could just say price stability. They box themselves into a corner. They're struggling to hit 2%, and they can't give up because if they wave the white flag before they get there, they lose their credibility. And the Fed's number one tool is credibility.
And so full employment is 2% unemployment is the definition?
There is no definition. When I was in econ school, 5% was considered full employment. That has led people to argue that 4% is an overheated labor market. And I disagree very strongly with this because if you look at the participation rate in the labor market pre-COVID, it was about 2% higher than it is today. And what that means is today's 4% is yesterday's 5%. So is the labor market doing pretty well? Yes, but it's not overheated. And as we move from 4 to 5, if you grew up with 5% as full employment, it kind of signals that we were going from 5 to 6. It's a bad sign. Things are starting to deteriorate. We are not going from overheated to full employment. We are going from full employment to things are starting to fall off.
And do you feel like businesses fire faster than they hire?
Not after COVID. In general, I think that's a fair assessment. I think after COVID, it was so hard to get people that we have seen people hang on to employees longer than they ever did before. And I think that that's bearing out right now where you're seeing companies have stopped hiring, but they have not yet started firing, which is normally what would happen in a cycle like this. We would have already shifted. Now, yesterday's ADP number, it's the only labor report we're getting right now because the government shut down, showed a loss of 32,000 jobs last month. It could be that we are on the verge of transitioning out of not hiring to actual firing. Once that happens, the wheels tend to fall off pretty quickly.
Next question. Let's say we were sitting at 0% inflation and you're trying to convince me and make the argument that we should be instead at 2%. What is the positive argument for some level of inflation?
Generally, it's that it encourages spending because if something's going to cost more in the future, then there's some incentive for you to buy it today. So they like the general sentiment that things will cost a little bit more in the future than they do today. That way you don't have a deterrent. The other reason is if it's 0%, if that's your target, you're flirting with deflation, which is definitely a problem, right? Because now you're disincentivizing spending. People will say, well, if it's going to cost less a year from now, I'll just wait. Then the wheels fall off the economy very fast. So to me, the 2% does two things. It gives you that cushion before you hit deflation, and it encourages spending. Just saying, listen, it's going to be more expensive if I wait. I might as well spend it now. That helps drive GDP.
Sorry, this led to another question, but there were, for a long period of time, a handful of countries that had negative Fed rates or the equivalent of the Fed rate. How does that work?
Who knows? Thankfully, we didn't get to that point. We saw it most notably out of Switzerland, and that was largely because they were trying to discourage safe haven deposits. They really just weren't built to handle that. So they were just taking rates negative. Like, you got to pay us if you're going to park your money here, rather than trying to, prompt the economy. So I think for most countries, generally speaking, 0% is the appropriate number. There has to be something else other than I'm trying to spur the economy to really take rates negative.
Okay. That makes a lot more sense than kind of what I had anticipated. All right. So now let's move on to kind of how the Fed thinks and decides. So do you think the Fed is doing a good job right now?
Overall, I'd say, yeah, they're doing a pretty good job. I think they've been a little bit behind the curve last year and this year, but far better than they were out of COVID. They were definitely a year behind coming out of COVID. They were very slow to move, and that's why we ended up seeing rates go as high as they did and having to stay there as long as they did. I always find it funny that people complain about the Fed always being behind the curve, and then when they start to move a little bit preemptively, everybody's mad at them saying, hey, why are you cutting rates right now? The economy's doing okay. It's like, well, the forward-looking signals are saying things are slowing down. We need to get out ahead of this.
Got it. And then what's the biggest misconception about how the Fed makes decisions, just in general?
I think one of the biggest misconceptions is how political it is, but that is changing rapidly. I think before today, every White House has always applied pressure to a Fed chair. I don't think it's new. I was on a panel about 3 or 4 years ago, and one of the Fed economists there said that the Biden administration was the most pressure he had ever seen applied to a Fed chair. The Fed chair does not necessarily react to it. That's why they're set up the way that they're set up. They're supposed to be able to retain independence. We're seeing that change a little bit right now. But in general, it sort of operates outside of political influence. They report to the president when he calls, but they get to do what they want to do because they have a whole bunch of different 14-year staggered terms. And so they're largely insulated from that.
I had no idea their terms were so long. Okay. What's the one signal you personally watch most closely as it relates to this kind of topic of conversation?
Again, I think that probably evolves given the environment. 2 years ago, I would have said inflation. Today, I would say it's the labor market. I do not believe that inflation at 3% will stop the Fed from cutting rates if it means it will help avoid American job losses. Everything to me is about the job market. So the fact that we're not getting job data right now is not great because it's setting us up for failure. I suspect that the next 2 meetings are largely already baked with cuts. And even if we don't get data, they'll still cut anyway and just assume we're probably on this path anyway.
Got it. And then if you had the entire Fed in this room right now, what would you say to them?
Stop relying on backward-looking data so much. That it can be a guidepost, but it shouldn't be all that we're looking at. And you certainly shouldn't be using it as a basis for current monetary policy. I can't believe that just a couple months ago, 7 FOMC members said we'd have no cuts this year. And fast forward to today, and now it looks like we're going to have 3. Well, how do the people who are in charge of these things fall so far behind that in July they say no cuts, and by the time you get around to September's meeting, 3 cuts? That, to me, impacts credibility, and I think that they are sometimes overly reliant on backward-looking data and discount forward-looking data.
I would tend to agree. Okay, so now let's talk rate outlook and scenario. So we just talked a lot about the rearview mirror. Now let's talk about the forecast. So where do you see rates heading over the next 12 to 24 months?
So the easy questions, right? So I usually break the rate question out into 2 sections, floating and fixed. The floating market, Fed funds, which controls SOFR, is absolutely moving lower. There is no doubt that it's moving lower. I believe that we'll get 2 more cuts this year, and we'll probably get about 2 cuts next year. That gets us down to around 3.5% Fed funds. I think the closer we get to 350, the more cautious they become. They start to get worried that, hey, right now we're kind of easing off the brakes, but once we get to 350, there's a chance we flip over and we start pressing on the gas pedal. And we don't want to do that either. We're trying to find this nice equilibrium. They're trying to bring us in for this nice landing.
So
I think if
for a redneck like me, 3.5% is different from 2%. Help me understand why that may be the gas pedal as opposed to the brakes at that 3.5 magic number.
So what they're searching for is this equilibrium rate called neutral rate. Neutral rate is really comprised of 2 components. You've got the natural rate plus inflation. The natural rate is unobservable, but every study that we have out there says it's less than 1%. It's around 75 basis points right now. It ran up during the inflation run up, but it's also come back down. So at 0.75, you then add on inflation. If you believe inflation, the new inflation is 3%, that's sort of 375. That implies that's around the equilibrium rate. In general, if Fed funds is above that level, then they're applying brakes to the economy. Once they go below that level, they're applying the gas pedal. So they don't know where this rate is because it's unobservable. They just know it's probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 350-ish. And the lower we go, the more likely we switch from easing off the brakes to pressing on the gas pedal. A very back of the envelope way to look at it is if Fed funds is above inflation, they're applying brakes. If Fed funds is below inflation, then they're pressing on the gas pedal. So if inflation's at 3 and we are at 4.25,
somewhere in between there,
they have ways to go before they're no longer pressing on the brakes, probably around 1.25. But what I think they'll be cautious about is it really 3 or is it 3.5? And so they will just become more and more cautious. If the wheels fall off the labor market, then all of that goes away and they'll just cut. We'll be below 3 very quickly.
So outside observer, all of these cuts are and have been predicted to be very gradual. And I think when we were anticipating them raising rates, we anticipated that to be gradual. But the charts that I look at, and again, outside observer, it looks like they almost never do things gradually.
Yeah.
And they're almost always overreacting.
And it's usually because they waited too long, right? So this recent tightening cycle that we saw after COVID, they waited too long to start hiking. That caused them to have to hike very aggressively. And that is not usually the case. Usually, rate hikes are slow and gradual. It's 25 basis points a meeting, 25 basis points every other meeting. They're just gradually pressing on the brakes a little bit. This was different. We threw $3 trillion on top of the economy. All of a sudden, everything was overheated. They had to play catch up. They waited too long, so they had to play catch up. Usually when they're cutting rates, they've waited too long and the wheels have fallen off the economy. And so they're having to slash and burn. When you think about COVID hitting, they were already cutting heading into COVID. That just exacerbated the move. Or the GFC, right?
Yeah, what were cuts like in 2009 and 2008?
Straight to zero. Like it was.
From what to zero? Order of magnitude.
We were at 5%. And we went to zero in very short order. I think that they saw that the wheels were coming off. They were trying to do 50 basis points. Then it became 75 basis points. Then it was just, we're going to zero right now. And it was like that. None of which mattered. It was too late. I think that they learned from that time period and said, you know what? We are eventually going to have to backstop this. We might as well just do it instead of prolonging the pain. Right? If you go back and you look at all the Fed intervention post-GFC, it took them about 3 years to implement everything. And they applied that lesson to COVID. Now, I think the politicians got involved and dropped in the helicopter money and overdid it. But the Fed itself just said, you know what, we've learned our lesson. We're just going straight to zero. I think going forward, barring some sort of global pandemic or a total collapse of the financial markets, slow and steady is the more normal path. And 25 basis points, maybe the occasional 50 basis points is not that big of a deal. It's still pretty gradual. If we see unemployment suddenly start jumping, if we jump from 4.5 to 4.7 to 5 to 5.3, the size of the cuts will increase pretty quickly.
I guess we've already kind of talked through your base case, downside case. We can skip over that. But a question that a lot of people that I speak with frequently ask, and I'm sure you've been asked this nonstop, is do you think we'll ever see mortgage rates back in the 2.6% range, or is that era gone for good?
I hope it's gone for good because I don't think it's a healthy environment. I think we're paying the price for that. I think the only reason we see that happen again is something as big as a global pandemic or the GFC happening again. If those sort of events happen, yes, we're going back down there. If it's just a normal slowdown, if unemployment goes up to sort of 7 or 8%, I do not think we'll get to 0%. I guess there is some chance that we might see rates down at zero if the current administration can stockpile people on the Fed governor table and sort of force rates to go artificially low. Aside from that, no, I think that 3-ish% is probably the baseline going forward. And when we need to stimulate the economy, we might cut to sort of 1.5. And if we need to cool off the economy, we might hike to 4.
Okay. And that assumes no more black swans.
Which happen every 5 years nowadays. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. These once in a lifetime events tend to happen every 4 or 5 years.
Exactly.
All right. What does your outlook mean for industrial and commercial real estate executives making financing decisions today, both for property owners, which is who you deal with most typically, right? And then also occupiers of real estate. So you're on industrial voices. So think machinery and big cap spends.
So I'll avoid the occupier because I won't have an educated opinion on that.
Okay.
For the landlords, for the owners, I would say it will be significantly better than it has been the last 2 or 3 years. I suspect that they're on edge a little bit to figure out. There's this baton passing going between capital markets and lending markets, and where the numbers just haven't worked the last couple of years. Rates were just too high. No deals penciled. I couldn't refi anything. I couldn't sell anything. Rates are coming down. That's helping to grease the skids a little bit. But at some point, if things deteriorate too much and push rates down, it's because the wheels fell off and those occupiers are no longer making payments.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's a different sort of problem, right? The math might work, but it won't matter because, the vacancy rate's up and delinquencies are up and defaults are up. So I think everybody here will be in a much better spot over the next sort of 12 to 18 months. And then we just have to monitor, do the wheels fall off or can we achieve a quasi soft landing?
So let's talk about deal volume for a second. And you may not have an answer to this question, and that would be totally respectable. But where does the Fed funds rate have to get to, or where does the open market rate for mortgages, commercial mortgages specifically, have to get to for deal volume in the commercial real estate industry to really pick up?
Yeah, I think that there's two components to that. Fed funds moving in the direction it's moving, with the forward guidance suggesting lower rates are on the horizon as well, is already starting to accelerate transactions because people are starting to price in the forward curve into their underwriting and into their lending. At the same time, the sizing is done by a fixed rate equivalent, usually a 10-year treasury. And the closer the 10-year can be to 4% and ideally sub 4, let's say 390-ish, the easier transactions start to happen. So I think we have hit that spot, and I think that there have been a lot of transactions that didn't quite pencil over the last 2 years that are close enough now that people are saying, let's just move forward. So we're seeing our transaction volume pick up significantly, and we interact with brokers all day long, and it certainly feels like they're way busier than they were a year ago.
And the other piece of that equation is the loan to value, right? So we had rising interest rates as well as dropping loan to values. Yep. Are you starting to see loan to values come back up, or is it still hanging low?
It's still hanging low, but I think one of the benefits of this most recent cycle is it was long enough that it forced people to start to come to grips with where would my asset actually trade at right now. Whereas if it had been a quick 1-year cycle, you'd have people still clinging to a sales price. I think most of them have come to reality of, hey, I missed the peak, but I'm still way better off than I was 6 years ago. I should still sell this thing now that I have a buyer who's willing to buy it.
Got it. So said another way, you had a group that bought a building expecting to get into the promote. They had a 3% interest rate. Now, 4 or 5 years later, you're looking at a 6.25% interest rate.
Mm-hmm.
And if you sell to a buyer that is using that type of debt at a very low loan to value, like you're taking a loss there, most likely. But as you kind of creep downwards towards maybe 5.5%,
exactly.
5.25%, 5%, now maybe we're not getting into the promote, but we're getting out alive.
Exactly.
And we're getting all of our soldiers back home.
That's it.
And so like that's kind of where you're saying is the magic point.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. That makes a lot of sense. So
I'm glad you were here to translate for me.
All right. And then the last one in that category is, what would you say are the two biggest economic forces acting on all of us right now?
Uncertainty is number one. Between tariff uncertainty, immigration uncertainty, and the impact that has on the labor market, government shutdown, all of this uncertainty, I think, is and has created a huge drag on the business this year. I think if you go back to Q4 of last year, like we were drowning in work, almost as busy as we were in sort of peak 22 timeframe. We started off this year much the same way. January was insanely busy, and it just felt like we were kind of off to the races. Once Trump took office and tariffs started taking over the headlines, it immediately started to cool down, and everything just sort of got paused. And I think that we're still seeing the lingering effects of that. So to me, that is the number one thing that is probably impacting business. Number two, and I think is probably the one that is not spoken about enough, is the potential impact of AI on everything. It's so funny that a year ago, I did a West Coast trip, and over the course of probably like 20 or 30 meetings, nobody wanted to talk about AI. And I've been this AI fanboy for years now. And everybody just thought it was a fad. No, we're not talking about that. Like, it has no impact on business. This year, same time of year, same clients, that's all they want to talk about. Nobody want to talk about interest rates. They only want to talk about AI. And so I think that the business leaders are struggling with, how is this going to impact things? Does this impact my workforce? Does this impact my tenants? Does this impact me? How do I make decisions? How about my technology decisions? There's a component of AI that feels like there's a second mover advantage because it's so expensive. Do I just wait and just see how all this shakes out? And so I think that that's having huge ramifications across the industry on how is this going to change everything about what I do, which is funny to say to a room full of executives who own physical assets, right? It probably feels like the group of people will be least affected by it. But there's no doubt that that is weighing on people's conscience right now.
Okay, well, I'm glad that you brought up both of those topics. So on the tariff equation, or the tariff side of things, there's so much chatter and buzz online or wherever you look about just how terrible of a move this was. I will stay apolitical, but that is, I feel like if you could go into a Bloomberg terminal and pull out like the average sentiment on tariffs, it would be hugely negative. Maybe this is just my own naivete, but like, I don't ever truly think that a lot of these people are just terrible at their jobs. Maybe they're a B+, A-, but like to get to the highest levels of almost anything, like you have to be a pretty terribly effective person. So what is the closed door argument for these tariffs, and why would we be doing this?
That by and large, we have allowed other countries to benefit from us in a trading capacity that was unfair. And it's time for us to level the playing field. If you want access to our store, we're going to charge you a little bit extra, right? And if you want access to the world's largest economy, it's going to cost you a little bit extra. And I think that that's a reasonable argument to make. I think that this administration has not done a great job of articulating their argument. But had they said something along those lines very clearly, it would have been a little bit easier to digest. I think the fact that they stumbled with the variance of tariffs, it's 15%, it's 10%, it's 25%, it's in effect today, it's out of effect tomorrow. That is what has really gotten people frustrated and makes it impossible to make a decision. If it's just, let's raise tariffs 10%, I think most people could have gotten right with that. It's like, just give me the rules to play by and I can adjust to them. It's the lack of certainty around the rules that's causing so much problem. I was with a client in Dallas probably about 2 months ago. And one of the things that we were talking about was everyone's all hung up on the negative impacts of this, but there is a revenue component to this that's going to eventually hit. And we have a spending problem, and there is some benefit to this. And that's just going to take time to play out. And I think we're starting to see some of those receipts come in. That to me is the argument for doing the tariffs, is there is some amount of fairness involved, and you want access, you got to pay for it. And then the other one is there's just a revenue line item that we could benefit from because our spending has been so reckless.
Yeah. I can't remember where I heard the adage, but it was essentially, hey, we're having a real hard time fixing our bottom line and expenses. Let's just go ahead and focus top line.
Right, yeah. It's a great point. And I think, we've got daughters who believe very strongly that the country's headed in the wrong direction. And, what we try to articulate for them is, hey, listen, some of these things are really just trying to make up for overspending in the past. If you guys had credit card bills that you had ran up and you were struggling, you might sooner or later just have to bite the bullet and deal with it. And that's kind of what we're having to deal with right now. Like, no, of course I don't want to cut funding to a program in Africa that's helping to, solve AIDS or something. Like, that strikes me as something I don't want to do. The trade-off is it's my fault we're in this situation to begin with. And we spent money we didn't have. And now we're having to make even more difficult decisions than if we had just confronted those decisions 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. And so for them, for this younger generation, trying to get them to look at it, it's not just in a vacuum. Like, these things were set into motion 10 years ago as spending started to spiral out of control. We're paying that price now. Difficult decisions are having to be made right now in order to right the ship. Where I think the administration does a terrible job is articulating that, because if you go onto a government website today, it just says the radical left shut down the government. It's like, well, had you instead said, no, we're having a debate over finances because we just don't believe that we should keep spending money this way, would have been a little bit different message, right? But it's just so polarizing, and that's leading to so much fraction in our country right now. There's really no good discussion happening.
Yeah. So game this out with me. Let's say that the Trump administration comes out and says explicitly what it is they're trying to accomplish with tariffs, which to me, I think it's a revenue issue. Does that affect the bond rating of the United States if they're claiming that they need to raise revenue in order to meet expenses?
I don't think it will affect any actual ratings. I think that what you might see is that rates could come down a little bit because it would be a signal. Someone is trying to address the fiscal irresponsibility of the last 15 years. That the spending since the GFC has been totally different than everything that came before it. At least somebody is trying to address some of these line items, and we can exhale a touch, right? Now, that will be totally offset by rates should be at 0%, which implies inflation, which implies the 10-year Treasury is going to go up because bondholders are going to sell, right? So this is the challenge I think that we're all grappling with right now.
Okay, here's a question that's slightly off script, but do you think the United States will ever have a sovereign wealth fund, or do you think we're just too far on the other side of the equation?
I think we're going too far on the other side of the equation. I mean, I think I get this question a lot, a variation of this question, which essentially, what happens when China starts bailing out of treasuries? And it's like, well, first of all, they're not gonna. That's just not gonna happen. Everybody reacts to the headlines. China is selling treasuries, and the official holdings, that's true, right? They've gone from $1 trillion to $800 billion. But let's keep in mind that really post GFC, when the Dodd-Frank laws required greater transparency around who was holding treasuries, all of a sudden, countries like Ireland and Luxembourg and Belgium, their treasury holdings spiked to something like 100x their GDP. Like, there's no chance that this is their actual holdings of treasuries. It's just China and Russia and Iran funneling treasury and hiding it through these custodial accounts. So China won't do that. And even if they do, $800 billion, as a friendly reminder, is a drop in the bucket compared to the amount of quantitative easing that the Fed has done the last several rounds. So China knows this and knows if we just dump treasuries, the Fed will just start buying treasuries, offset whatever damage we're trying to cause, and that's not going to happen. So I think when I think about the U.S., the sovereign fund, there could be some political influences there that could lead to that. I don't think so. I think we will instead just focus on being the world's mattress. And if we can be the best of the best, we will continue to be the world's mattress. And
meaning store your cash here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like Jamie Dimon has done a much better job than I could of articulating how this dynamic is unlikely to change and is very unlikely to change in a short amount of time, where you hear people say, well, we're losing our status as the reserve currency. And his argument is, like, that's not a valid statement. Like, whatever you're saying right now is just based on fear-mongering, and you're just picking up in the headlines, because in order to be the reserve currency, you need rule of law, you need military power, and you need economic might, right? We've got all those things exponentially more than anybody else, the next closest competitor. For those things to deteriorate can happen, but it takes time. He's like, we might not be the world's mattress 40 years from now, but we will be the world's mattress 4 years from now. That sort of stuff will take time to play out. Hopefully it doesn't. It won't happen overnight. So stop screaming about, the U.S.'s loss of reserve currency status. Like, it's just not going to happen.
And said another way for people that aren't in your world, like, we are the world's high yield savings account.
Sure. Yeah. And it's where you go to put your money when you want return of principal and not return on principal. When you just want to make sure you get your money back, you come here. And I think what people forget about the 10-year Treasury in particular is a lot of sovereign funds, a lot of pension funds, and a lot of central banks have a mandate on how many treasuries they have to buy. They just have to buy them. They have to own them. So it is different than any other asset class. It does not behave the way that you would expect any other sort of corporate bond to behave. It's just going to always be different until we lose that status.
Got it. And for someone who may not be fully understanding the risks associated and why you might want to put it in the Americas as opposed to somewhere else, like, your FDIC account's only insured up to $250,000. If you're trying to park $250 billion, like, you have to think about things a little differently.
Absolutely. And that's why the argument that people are going to take their money and go somewhere else doesn't really hold water for me, because if you look at our treasury market, it is as big as the next 9 biggest countries combined. So there is no depth to these countries. The really only quality peer alternatives are Germany and Australia, and they are a fraction of the size of the United States. So you can't throw $250 billion
Right.
into the German Bund and say, "Oh, I'm now max long Germany." Right?
Yeah.
There's just no depth for that market. So people continue to come to the United States.
And some of our businesses in the United States, if they were countries in and of themselves, are in the top 50 countries in the world.
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
I think Walmart's like well into the top 50.
Right.
Apple, same deal. Like, and so like just businesses here are bigger than most countries.
And then you start looking at the states like Texas and California. It's like they would dwarf most other full countries. Like the United States has a lot going for it. And this is again where we go back to our daughters and say, we're all very lucky to be here, right? Mm-hmm. We should be grateful we were born here. We won the lottery by being born here. And let's hope that we can keep making this a great place to live. But let's not also poo-poo the United States. Like, we're still doing pretty well. Like,
yes. And I went through a decade by decade with a family member the other night, and I like to read a lot about history. But every decade, there has been some kind of powder keg moment in our country. And you can probably go all the way back to the Revolutionary War. Like, we've always been this like powder keg divided country shooting people in the streets. Like, we've always been that way. And like, a lot of that is like deeply American. Like, if you read a Vanderbilt biography, like he's literally fist fighting other steam ferry drivers. Right. Like, and fist fighting the police officers trying to stop. Like, it was just like bare knuckle brawling in the streets. It's super cool to read about, but like, come on, like we're not the most divided we've ever been.
Right.
Like, we had the Civil War. That was bad.
Right.
Like,
exactly. Yeah.
And so, like, yeah, I'm deeply optimistic on the United States just in general, and I'm glad that you kind of share that view. All right. Trends to watch. So let's switch over to the trends to watch. Like, what risks are keeping you up at night as a business leader, and then also someone who does what it is you do?
So in the economy, number one is the labor market. This is the biggest concern. The cracks have been revealing themselves for the last 2 years, particularly among low-income earners. And I think that high-income earners have largely been doing well. But if you look at consumer spending, it's that top 10% really that's driving GDP right now. And if we see the labor market start to roll over and that top 10% stops spending, things can change very quickly. And it's already not good if you're in the bottom half of income earners. So from the economy standpoint, to me, it is all about the labor market and how things such as tariffs or a government shutdown impact the labor market. Once people lose jobs, everything else changes. If you listen to the podcast, my saying is everyone's a tough guy until their friends and family lose jobs. Then all of a sudden, you change your tune, right? You're like, Fed should be cutting interest rates. We need lower rates. Yeah. On the business leader front, it is without a doubt AI. Like, AI to me is something that none of us can fully wrap our brains around and is going to be the most transformational technology of our lifetime. I think the only corollary I can think of in history is electricity. There is nothing else that is going to be as transformational as this. How do you make a decision with that hanging over your head, right? It's just so overwhelming. So those are the two things that I think would keep me up at night most right now.
I love it. So, and on the AI side, and you're far more knowledgeable on this than I am, and so this is why I asked the question, but I saw an article somewhere, and there may or may not be truth to this, that with the amount of spend on AI right now, in order for us to be achieving a reasonable ROI on that cap spend, we have to achieve an aggregate $2 trillion in revenue in 5 years on AI.
Wow.
So there's going to be losers, right? Like, this is, like, some people do not get that money back.
And like, I'm one of them. That's why I talked about the second mover advantage. It's just because I put my hand on the stove a couple times and got burned. It was just like, oh, this is going to be amazing. This is going to help abstract like SREOs, for example. And then we spent a bunch of money and we were able to abstract SREOs, drop in a PDF and it would come back. Next thing you know, ChatGPT comes out a month later and it does it for us. And it would have cost $20 a month. I was like, son of a gun. Can't get that money back, right? And then we've chased a couple other projects. And, you know, real estate is such a nuanced, specialized space that if you talk to a generalist, like we had a contract with AWS, Amazon's AI scientist team, and we had a contract with them, and they came in and tried to build something. And in their mind, it worked because it, you know, literally transposed the word loan balance from a loan document over into the software. And we're like, yeah, but it grabbed the wrong loan balance. There's different versions of loan balance. And I think if you're not in the real estate industry, you don't appreciate that cap rate can have a whole bunch of different definitions, right? And so I got burned. So I always tell our clients, do not spend money chasing that right now. Like let the dust settle a little bit till you figure that out, because these generalists will make promises about how AI is going to work, not appreciating the nuance. And technically, does it do what they said it would do? Maybe, but it doesn't actually help your business at all. And you end up chasing something that's not beneficial at all.
It's interesting you say that, because I had a friend of a friend reach out to me to get my thoughts on a product they were developing. It was an AI product in our space. I won't be too specific, but we walked through it. And after I understood the product, I was like, my peers, my clients, we have no need for this. And they had spent a great deal of time and money on it.
Yeah.
Like not like, it's not, a portion of our market will use this, but like quite literally no one will use this. And yeah, I feel like there's a lot of people that are raising a lot of money just with the AI tag associated. Exactly. And if they don't have a deep understanding already of an industry that they're trying to plug into, like it can be brutal.
Yeah.
So,
and it's a huge waste of time. It's a huge waste of your team's resources. And I think when it first really hit the scene, I was very focused on the aspirational benefits. Like I'm just obsessed with this idea of optimizing every interest rate decision. Like it's just been like my career obsession. I'm going to squeeze every inefficiency out of these decisions. I thought, this is it. This is what's going to get us there. And I do think that eventually it will help us get there. But for now, where it's being most impactful is the tactical stuff. It's just little stuff day in and day out that takes somebody who's already good at their job and makes them twice as good. Well, when you multiply that across 7,500 employees, all of a sudden that is a dramatic impact. So I have toned down my expectations about the moonshots and instead said, maybe the moonshot is really just me making my existing team awesome at what they do and like sort of doubling them. And that productivity growth is staggering.
Yeah. Well, and I think that like me, I'm younger, right? And I look back at like the .com boom, and people had all these aspirational ideas of what the internet could do for themselves and for the economy and for the world. And like the real winner was a search engine, and then Reddit, which is a forum where you can go and talk to your friends, and then Facebook. They weren't these just unbelievably transformational technologies. I mean, don't get me wrong, Google's huge, it's incredible. But I feel like the truest applications of AI that will be transformative are these little mundane, like in the small detail type applications, not these massive ones. But I don't know. I'm not a tech guy. I do industrial real estate for a living.
Well, I think that you're right there. Like Peter Thiel's got a book, 0 to 1, where he talks about and advocates for tech companies being monopolies. And his point is technology is different than every other industry where only behemoths survive. When you look at the number of Facebooks, it's only a couple of social media platforms that exist, and then they kind of eat each other, right? That's different than in real estate where there's 10,000 that you could throw a dart and hit. So it's just a different animal. What it does do, however, is totally transform everything that we do. There's this well-known law in technology called Amara's Law, where we tend to overstate the impact of technology in the short run, understate the impact in the long run. And I think we're kind of hitting that crest right now, where the first couple of years, guys like me were like, oh my gosh, this is going to be unbelievable. Overstated the impact it was going to have in the near term. Fast forward 10 or 15 years, AI is going to be in everything we do. We'll totally forget that it even is a thing. It will just be in existence the way that the internet is. We don't refer to it as the internet anymore. It's just everything that we do is through it. And I think that's how AI will be in the next 10 years.
Yeah. Well, and almost everyone in my family tree, from teenagers all the way through to almost grandparents, is using AI in some capacity.
Right.
Like that is a deep saturation, like very quickly.
The genius is in the simplicity, right? It doesn't require training. All you have to do is start typing. All you have to do is communicate with it, and it's off and running. And that's why I think it's so transformational, is that there is no learning curve whatsoever. And we really haven't seen something like that before.
Right. Well, and I wonder, so in the educational system, how long it will take to modify our educational system to adapt to it. Because we were talking last night with a handful of parents that have kids in college and kids at high school at the exact same time. And right now in college, it's almost welcome. There are classes being developed for it. Like this is a real life practical skill that they're trying to teach people. In high school, it's demonized. And like they're doing everything they can to snuff it out. And I just feel like that's a breakdown.
It's crazy. Like I have been pushing our kids to use AI from the day it came out. And I said, you got to listen to what your teachers tell you. But I'm also telling you, you can use this as a research tool the way that you would use the internet as a research tool, right? Don't plagiarize, but you might as well just get used to using this, because 3 years from now, everybody's going to be using this, and you might as well just get on board. It's like the teachers who used to fight people from using calculators.
Yeah, you'll never have a calculator in your
Right,
pocket
exactly,
every day.
exactly. It's like, come on, it's like let's give them the tools that they need. Let them focus on what that critical thinking skill should be, rather than the mundane gathering of information.
Right. Well, and I understand the argument for like, okay, if you're going to do a discounted cash flow analysis, you should understand how that formula is working, and within a reasonable certainty, be able to look at an answer from AI and determine if that's directionally right or probably wrong.
Yep.
And like AI will give me answers back to things that are wrong.
Yes, 100%.
But I can identify it almost immediately.
Exactly.
Whereas like if you've not actually learned in school or done these things analog, like you probably wouldn't.
You won't have the intuition.
Yeah.
Yep. No, I agree 100%.
So we have a handful of minutes here, and I want to talk through. So what, in its simplest form, what do you do?
I don't know. If you figure it out, let me know. So I run two companies. The first is Pensford. That company's been around for 16, 17 years, and I started it during the GFC because I have great timing. And we are an interest rate advisory firm. And so the reason that most people know is because I've been writing this newsletter for 20 years. And I started writing it when I was at Wachovia, and then colleagues started saying, "Hey, can you put my clients on your distribution list?" When I started Pensford, that became my launching point, and I just started writing a newsletter and really just started talking about interest rates. That sort of grew over time, and Pensford just continued to grow, and now we have probably about 30 employees, and we do a couple thousand transactions a year, and we work with all different types of real estate owners and asset types all over the country. That led me to starting LoanBoss about 6 years ago, because it was just so infuriating to me how far behind the times real estate is with technology. And I thought, well, I'm in a unique position because I have enough exposure to sort of the debt side of the business without being an expert at loans. But I am an expert with the complex interest rate calculations. And there's not a lot of people in the country that are experts at that part. There's probably less than 100 people in the country. So if we can incorporate complex calculations, defeasances, prepays, forward curve analysis, interest rate caps, swaps, all of that, and couple that with loan cash flows and amortization schedules, and we have a deep understanding of that as well, then maybe we can create a tool that will help people just be better at their jobs. Because so many smart, hardworking real estate people spend too much time doing mundane stuff, like just gathering, compiling data. Let's get you to the last 20%, that last mile where your expertise really matters. So that led me to starting LoanBoss, and I still have no clue about technology, but I have been forced to learn a lot of painful lessons over the last 6-7 years that I've now applied to the business. So it has been quite the journey switching from just being sort of this interest rate consultant to also trying to run a tech company, and realizing, oh, those tech CEOs had a hard job. I didn't realize it would be this hard.
Yeah. Well, I feel like LoanBoss is an incredible tool. Like when I first got into this business, I was working as kind of an asset manager for a large portfolio. And anytime the higher ups would come down to Bradley and say, "Hey, can you run some type of loan contingency analysis or scenario for me?" I would like take a deep exhale, because I would have to then go into these files that were 150 pages long.
Right.
And like you said prior with your AI adventure, like the pages contradict each other beautifully. But they do, and they're designed to do that. But and so I can imagine that that's hugely helpful for a lot of folks, especially guys like Bradley when he was first starting out.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
It's like so many of these things should have been automated a long time ago, but we're all busy, and I think we all spend a lot of time trying to optimize Excel, right? And I think we just sort of realize we're optimizing the wrong thing. We should instead just start new and say, if we were building from scratch, how would we do this? We now have technology available to us that did not exist when Excel really took off. Maybe the industry needs to just bite the bullet and start shifting over to a smarter way of doing things.
Yeah. So talk to us about the newsletter. I feel like if you're listening to this, you should absolutely subscribe to the newsletter. How did it start? Because I would imagine when you were at Wachovia, you were probably media trained and had to be a lot more formal than maybe you are today. But how did it start, and where are you now? What does it do?
Zero media training. But my background with that actually began at Penn State, because I started off as a journalism major. And I tried out for the Penn State newspaper. There was like 400 people that tried out, and I was one of 2 freshmen to get selected. So I wrote for the Penn State newspaper. I hated having to stick to the facts. I wanted to give my opinion. And back then, true journalism did not allow that. I was just ahead of my time, I guess, because if I'd waited about 15 years, I would have crushed it. So I was like, well, this doesn't make any sense. I don't want to just regurgitate facts. So after I got out of the Army, I went into economics. And so when I got to Wachovia, for me, it was just a way for me to articulate what was going on in the market. Initially, it was just sort of for myself. And then I started sending it to a couple clients on Tuesday afternoons, with just a real quick summary. And then, like I said, colleagues started putting the names on the list. And when I left Wachovia and I started that email blast, my guess is I probably had about 200 people on it. And then over the years, it's grown to, I think we have about 12 or 13,000 subscribers at this point. And I don't know why people read this newsletter. It just doesn't make any sense to me. It's about interest rates and sports. So I figured people have better stuff to do, but here we are.
Well, it's interesting. And I always think about that, and hopefully one day I could achieve this. But when I make a hire, I require them to do a handful of things when they first join our team, one of which is sign up for a couple of newsletters and email distributions that I believe to be the best, and one of which is yours. And I have to imagine that there's a lot of guys like me out there. And so I think that you do a really good job of making these complex concepts accessible to people that are brand new to the business, or and it's just heady enough that, like, if you've been at this for 25 years, like, it's also intriguing and interesting to you. So to me, like, I wouldn't sell yourself short. Like, I think you do a really tremendous job of it. I'm curious, just operationally, like, how much time do you spend on that, and how much business comes from it?
So it is without a doubt our number one marketing tool. I would say I generally spend about 5 or 6 hours a week on it, and most of that tends to come either Saturday or Sunday morning. I get up and I just start working, and I tend to write it first thing in the morning because that's when I'm at my best. And then once I'm done, the wife makes me sit in the podcast chair, and then we record right after that.
So you're spending a lot of time on this on the weekends?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So
Yep.
This isn't between the wires Monday to Friday. No. So, I mean, you've got to deeply enjoy doing it, right?
I don't know if I deeply enjoy doing it every weekend, but there was probably 3 or 4 times in the first 5 years or so that Pensford existed where I could trace an actual transaction directly to a newsletter that kept me in business. Because those first 5 years, I was a one-man shop for a lot of them, and there was no guarantee that I was going to stay in business. The very first deal I ever did was a big shop here in Charlotte that I had never spoken to personally, but were on the distribution list. And when I sent that first email, he had me come out to the office 2 days later and hired me on the spot, and that paid the bills for like 6 months, right? And that sort of thing happened 2 or 3 more times when I was kind of on the verge. And that just told me, like, I got to remember where I came from. I can't ever just stop doing this. Like, This just has to be part of who we are. This is going to be core to our identity. But I do enjoy it because I enjoy writing. Yeah. And it just helps me articulate what's going on in my head. And then I did not have any media training at Wachovia, thankfully. And now I just get to say whatever I want to say because I just report to myself and to the real boss.
That's awesome. Well, and not that it's some huge prize, but the reason you're on this podcast is because of that newsletter.
That is a huge prize.
You're kind, but yeah, I have to imagine that, like, those 13,000 people are funneling things to you or talking about you and talking about your ideas. Also, it makes sense that you'd have to do it on the weekends because markets close, right? Whereas, like, for me, I could do that whenever, theoretically. I could do it on a Thursday night, and I don't really have to worry about the real estate markets closing. Yeah,
and it's mostly just a focus thing because during the week, like, I might when I see something that interests me, I'll dump it into a Slack channel that I save for the weekend just to organize my thoughts. But it's like, Saturday morning generally is when I write it, and it's just easy for me to get up. I don't have a whole bunch of people asking me questions at that point, and I can just jump in. I'm uninterrupted, and I just go. But I joke sometimes in the newsletter, on the podcast, like, there are times when we're away for a sports tournament. I set that alarm for like 1:30 in the morning, and I get up and I start writing because the game starts at 8 a.m. And it's like, I just got to remember there was a time when I thought I might be going out of business, and a newsletter kept me in business, and I got to remember that, and I'm not going to skip this weekend.
That's great. Well, I guess and I ask this question to everybody, but when should people be reaching out to you or think to reach out to you? So what trigger in their inbox should be saying, hey, call JP?
On the Pensford side, it's anytime you have an interest rate question. We don't care if there's a transaction. We don't care if you have a hedge you need to buy. It's just, if you're thinking about interest rates, just give us a shout. That's why our website says we're the interest rate people. We just like talking about interest rates. We're just nerds for this stuff. So it doesn't matter to us if it results in a transaction. We just want to build long-term relationships. The rest will take care of itself when you take care of the customers. On the LoanBoss side, if you're managing debt and you're like, there's got to be a better way to do this and I got to make my team better, that's when you give us a shout. Like, hey, let me see what this is about. Let me see if I can actually give my team some tools to be better at their jobs, because I'm a real estate guy that happens to do tech. So it's going to be a very robust enterprise level software experience for your team. It's not going to be smoke and mirrors, because I'm not going to burn a relationship by trying to sell something that they don't need.
Great. Well, thank you to everyone who has listened. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
I really appreciate it. And we'll be back, I guess next month. But appreciate you. If you ever need anything, you know where to find me. And actually, so I stink at closing these out. We're going to delete that. You teach me how to close these out.
So when I close out our podcast, what I usually just say is, so with the week ahead, we've got some GDP reports. Hopefully the government opens back up. Philadelphia is probably going to lose their first game this weekend, and I'll probably be in a cranky mood on Monday. But we appreciate you guys listening, and we'll talk to you next month.
Perfect. Did it better than I could. Let's go with that. All right. Have a good one.
See ya.
Appreciate you. Thank you for joining us on the Industrial Voices podcast. Appreciate you tuning in. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to this show on your preferred platform and consider sharing with a friend. And if I can be of any help to you or your team regarding your real estate, please email me or visit my website, info in the show notes.